I was standing outside my own son's wedding when he looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't family anymore. Not, "Please leave," not, "This is complicated." No, he blocked the church doors with his body while guests stared from the steps behind him and said coldly, "You weren't invited, Mom." At that exact moment, the woman standing behind him in a white wedding dress smiled at me like she had already won. What nobody there knew, not the guests, not the priest, not even my son, was that I had spent the last 8 months uncovering a secret so ugly it would destroy the wedding before they ever reached the altar. And hidden inside my purse was a single text message capable of ruining everything, because the woman my son was about to marry wasn't even using her real name. So my name is Summer Hammond, and I'm 55 years old. The morning of my son's wedding began with a feeling I couldn't explain. Not fear, something colder, the kind of silence your soul makes before disaster. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror fastening the pearl earrings my husband Thomas once gave me and whispered, "Pull yourself together, Summer." My hands were shaking anyway. My son Vincent used to love those earrings. When he was 7, he called them my queen jewels. I almost smiled remembering it. Almost. The church was 2 hours away, but every mile felt heavier than the last. Vincent hadn't answered my calls in 3 days. His fiancée Hannah claimed they were busy finishing wedding preparations, yet something about her voice during that last phone call made my stomach tighten. Too cheerful, too rehearsed. When I arrived, the church looked beautiful enough to break your heart. White roses wrapped around the stone columns. Violin music drifted through the open doors. Guests laughed under the afternoon sun while cameras flashed across the steps. And for one tiny second, I thought maybe everything would be okay. Then Vincent stepped directly in front of me, blocking the entrance. My breath caught instantly. He didn't hug me, didn't even smile. "Mom," he said flatly. I forced warmth into my voice. "You look handsome." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have come." The words hit so hard I actually thought I misheard him. What? Behind him, I spotted Hannah inside the church lobby in her wedding dress. She wasn't nervous, wasn't emotional. She was watching me, carefully, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Vincent lowered his voice. "You're not invited." My chest physically hurt. "Vincent, I'm your mother." Hannah and I agreed it's better this way. Better. That word nearly destroyed me. People nearby had started staring now, whispering. One woman slowly lowered her phone after realizing she'd accidentally recorded part of it. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and barely recognized the man standing there. This wasn't the little boy who used to wait by the window every evening for me to come home from work. This wasn't my Vincent. Then came the final knife. The family decided you're not part of it anymore. Behind him, Hannah smiled. Tiny, satisfied, victorious. And suddenly, every sleepless night of the past year made sense. The canceled visits, the cold phone calls. She had been pulling Vincent away from me piece by piece. I should have broken down right there on those steps, but I didn't, because inside my purse was something Hannah never saw coming. I tightened my grip on the leather strap and looked Vincent dead in the eyes. "Okay," I said quietly, "but check your phone before the ceremony starts." For the first time all afternoon, my son looked afraid. 3 minutes before my son's wedding ceremony collapsed, I sat alone inside my car across from the church and stared at my phone screen. 3:07 p.m. My thumb hovered above the message that could destroy everything or save my son's life. And suddenly, against my will, I heard Thomas's voice again. Weak, tired, dying. "Summer, Come closer. The memory hit me so hard I had to close my eyes. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fading hope. Rain tapped softly against the windows while machines blinked around my husband's bed. Thomas looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were still sharp, watching, thinking, seeing things the rest of us missed. He reached slowly into the drawer beside him and handed me a sealed envelope. "Promise me something," he whispered. I grabbed his hand immediately. Anything. His fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. "Don't give Vincent the estate until you know he's emotionally safe." I frowned through tears. Emotionally safe from who? Thomas gave me a long look I still can't forget. From people who love money more than they love him. That sentence terrified me back then. Now it haunted me. After Thomas died, I discovered the truth he'd hidden for decades. Manufacturing shares, commercial buildings, investment accounts worth millions. Every single asset legally transferred under my control until Vincent proved he was mature enough to protect both himself and the family legacy. At first, I thought Thomas had worried for nothing. Then Hannah entered our lives, and within months, my son became someone I barely recognized. The first time she came to dinner, she walked through my home slowly, studying everything with terrifying precision, not admiring, calculating. "How much is this property worth now?" she asked casually while touching the dining room wall. I laughed nervously. "That's an unusual question." Hannah smiled without blinking. "I just think financially." Later that night, Vincent defended her immediately. "You're overthinking her, Mom." But then the phone calls stopped. Then Sunday dinners disappeared. Then one afternoon, Vincent's little nephew, Ricky, the child I babysat almost every weekend, looked up at me innocently and said, "Hannah says you make Vincent feel bad about everything." I froze completely, because children don't create sentences like that on their own. They repeat what they hear behind closed doors. And in that exact moment, the uneasiness I'd been trying to ignore turned into something much darker. Certainty. And the exact moment I realized my dying husband had seen this disaster coming long before I did. So sitting there outside the church with Vincent's wedding minutes away, I finally pressed send. The exact moment my son's wedding died, his phone vibrated inside his tuxedo pocket, and I watched it happen from across the street. Even from inside my car, I saw Vincent glance down at the screen impatiently, probably expecting another wedding message. Instead, he opened the file that shattered his entire reality. But to understand why his face drained of color so fast, you need to understand what I had discovered 2 weeks earlier. The private investigator's name was Elise Moreno, former Financial Crimes Division, sharp eyes, no wasted words, the kind of woman who could smell lies before people even finished speaking. She sat across from me in a quiet cafe and slid a thick gray folder across the table. "You were right to worry about her," Elise said calmly. My stomach tightened instantly. "How bad is it?" Elise opened the file, and suddenly my world changed. Different driver's licenses, different cities, different last names. Hannah wasn't even her legal name. I stared at the photographs with shaking hands. One picture showed her beside an older man outside a luxury condo in Arizona. Another showed her leaving a courthouse beside someone else entirely. She targets financially stable men, builds emotional dependency, pushes isolation from family, then comes asset access. My chest physically hurt listening to it, because every single thing she described was happening to Vincent. Then Elise handed me the final document: active fraud investigations, open complaints, a quiet warrant waiting in another state.
I whispered, "Oh my God." And Elise looked me dead in the eyes. "Your son isn't marrying her," she said quietly. "He's being acquired by her." That sentence nearly made me cry, because suddenly every painful moment made sense. The canceled birthdays, the sudden canceled family visits, the afternoon Vincent's little nephew Ricky stopped mid-sentence and called me Summer instead of Miss Summer before awkwardly correcting himself because Hannah had told him older titles sound outdated. No, that wasn't harmless. It was deliberate. Everything Hannah did was deliberate. Then came the moment that destroyed me completely. Vincent and Hannah arrived at my house carrying legal papers asking me to transfer ownership of my home for tax efficiency. I looked directly at my son. Is this really what you want? And instead of answering me, he looked at Hannah first. That was the moment I knew my son was drowning while believing he was in love. So at 3:10 p.m., minutes before the ceremony began, I sent Vincent everything. The false identities, the fraud reports, the hidden past, and one final legal notice revoking immediate access to Thomas's estate. 30 seconds later, Vincent staggered backward inside the church. Then Hannah saw his face, and for the very first time since I met her, she looked terrified. At 11:43 that night, someone knocked on my front door. Not softly, desperately. I already knew it was Vincent. A mother always knows the sound of her child falling apart. When I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. My son stood there in half of his wedding tuxedo. His white shirt was wrinkled, the bow tie hung loose around his neck, and his eyes looked hollow, like someone had ripped the ground out from under him. For 3 seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent whispered one sentence. "Mom, I didn't know," and completely broke. He collapsed against me so hard I almost lost my balance. My son, my strong, stubborn, proud son, shook in my arms like a terrified little boy. I held him instantly, because no matter what he had said to me at that church, he was still my child. I pulled him inside while he fought to breathe through the panic. "Hannah's gone," he choked out. "She disappeared." We sat at the kitchen table until nearly midnight, the same table where Hannah once smiled sweetly while trying to take my home away from me. Vincent buried his face in his hands. "She knew everything," he whispered. "The accounts, Dad's estate." Every word made my stomach twist harder. Then he looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "She told me you were manipulating me." That hurt more than the church, more than the humiliation, because suddenly I understood how deeply Hannah had poisoned him against me. Vincent's voice cracked again. "She said you only cared about controlling Dad's money." I stared at my son in shock. Thomas's money? I would have traded every dollar for one more year with my husband. And somehow, this woman had turned my grief into something ugly inside my own son's mind. Then Vincent confessed something that nearly broke my heart completely. Hannah kept saying formal distance was healthier. She didn't want us to see each other very often, and I went along with it. For a moment, I just stared at him. That explained everything. The sudden awkwardness, the emotional distance, the way the child who once loved me so much, arms, had slowly begun pulling away. Vincent lowered his head instantly, tears spilling onto his trembling hands. "Mom, I don't know what happened to me. I'm sorry," he whispered over and over. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I reached across the table and grabbed his trembling hands. "Look at me," I said softly. He did, and for the first time in over a year, I finally saw my real son again, not Hannah's version of him, mine, broken, ashamed.
But finally awake. And deep down, I knew something else too. The worst part of this story still hadn't happened yet. 3 months after the wedding collapsed, Vincent finally asked me the question I had feared for years. "Mom, what did Dad write about me in that letter before he died?" The room went completely still. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while my hands tightened around my coffee cup. For a second, I saw Thomas again, pale in that hospital bed, pressing the sealed envelope into my trembling hands. "Only give this to him when he's ready," he had whispered. That night, my son was finally ready. I walked slowly to my bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand, and pulled out the envelope I had protected for 3 years. Vincent stared at his father's handwriting before carefully opening it. And the moment he started reading, his entire face broke. His lips trembled violently, then tears rolled onto the paper. I will never forget what Thomas wrote. "If you are reading this, Vincent, then your mother protected you exactly the way I prayed she would. Even when you pushed her away, even when you didn't understand her, she is the best person I have ever known. Take good care of her." Vincent suddenly covered his face and sobbed. Not quietly, not politely. The kind of crying that comes from realizing how close you came to destroying the person who loved you most. "I failed both of you," he whispered. I grabbed his hand immediately. "No, you survived someone dangerous." That night changed everything. Months later, Vincent officially took over Thomas's businesses, slowly, carefully, responsibly. He rebuilt relationships, he started therapy, and one Sunday morning, Vincent's young nephew Ricky burst through my front door and threw his arms around me, shouting happily, "Dear Miss Summer." He didn't call me Summer in a cold way. Vincent stood quietly behind him, his eyes filling with tears as he watched the moment unfold. And in that moment, I realized something heartbreaking. Manipulation steals people quietly, but real love waits patiently at the door, hoping one day the person it lost finally comes home.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.